Hi everyone, it's Charlie Webster here. Welcome to a new episode of My Sport in Mind, the podcast that's all about opening up the conversation around mental health and mindset in sport and life. Season 2 is proudly supported by sportinglife.com, ahead of the rest when it comes to unbiased opinion and sports analysis. Today we're heading into the world of football management, something I love. I'm really excited to welcome the Queen's Park Ranger. I'm not used to saying that. I always say QPR, Queen's Park Rangers manager, Mark Warburton, to the podcast. Welcome along.
Charlie, how are you?
I'm very good. Oh, thanks. I'm very good. Thank you. The reason why I said something I'm always fascinated in, not that I have any experience in football management, it's just I find that I love the psychology of it. And I think that that must play such a big role in terms of management and managers. And I always find it so fascinating getting in depth when it comes to talking to football managers or sports managers. But anyway, how are you?
Yeah, very good. It's been a really challenging run of fixtures. Everyone's being challenged in an unprecedented way, really. But we're nearly there, nearly at the end of the finishing line. So it's need to finish the season strongly and then have a good break and start again very quickly.
It's funny you said about the players need a good, well-earned rest. But what about you? I bet you do as well, and the pressure that's on you. And you must focus so much on the players and their welfare. But who manages you, and how do you manage yourself in terms of your own mental health?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the importance of the staff, I've always placed a huge significance, Charlie, on the quality of the support network, that the staff around the players, so medical, analytics, sports science, coaching, etc., nutrition, psychology, to make sure the players have access to the best people to help them through what are really challenging times anyway, let alone in this virus hit season. In terms of myself, I try and delegate wisely. I think that's just, I'm saying that from the city, I learned that the best managers delegate well and get the best staff possible. And that's my role I see it as creating an environment which is conducive for staff to develop and players to develop. If I could put that structure in place, I think everything moves forward nicely and you've done the hard part of your job, Charlie.
I think delegation's harder than it sounds. Would you say that?
It is, because you can easily be seen as giving up responsibility, or basically not working hard enough. But you've got to make sure you trust your staff. So if you have a medical guy on board and a physio makes a recommendation about loadings or training, etc., or putting a player out, you have to trust him. There's no point writing, roughshod over decision from one member of your staff. You have to trust them. You have to give them responsibility, and they know in turn, the good guys know, Charlie, that they're accountable as well. Because what I find is people want the responsibility, not the accountability. So if you can make sure they know how the process works, they know that you trust them, but they also know there's a consequence to their decision, then I think you're in a good place.
I was thinking of it in terms as well. It's hard to delegate because of you wanting to control things. I'm not saying you, I just mean in general. I think there's an element of wanting to make sure a manager has control over everything. So in terms of delegation, also you being able to let go, is that something that you find?
Yeah, you have to. I mean, I think managers, by the very nature of that control obsession in them, they want to be organising. But I think it's very important you also recognise not to spread yourself too thin. If you're trying to cover all areas, when I hear people say, "Why do you have a director of football or a sporting director?" You have to, otherwise you simply spread yourself too thin and dilute the quality of your end product. You have to make sure that it's quality, not quantity, and focus on what you have to do. It's about the team, it's about the players, individual and generic needs, about the staff. Create that environment. There's other areas you have to delegate or have to rely on other individuals and trust them. If you don't, there's no point doing the role.
I think there's a lot of strength in that as well, knowing that you need all these pieces. Like it's that community, isn't it, to be able to succeed rather than just yourself, and you bring other brains to it, you're always going to be better. Mark, you mentioned in the city, so for those that don't know, you worked as a trader. Did you work on the floor?
We worked in the currency markets. Yeah, we were on the coalface, so to speak. So we would trade currencies. But as I've mentioned many times, Charlie, it's so similar to a dressing room. The dealing room, it was male dominated early on, and that changed thankfully later. But early on, it was a very competitive environment. It was one that demanded communication, very competitive, very, very competitive. Testosterone filled. If you did well, you got rewarded. If you didn't, you lost your job. People always wanted your seat, because you're in a job, Charlie, where if you did well, you had access to good rewards. You were well paid and bonuses were significant. So people wanted that. But it's very similar to a football shirt. Everyone will always want the guy's shirt. So it's that competitive environment, dealing with the stress, dealing with the pressure, and almost thriving off the challenge as opposed to being crushed by it. and the right people absolutely embrace any type of challenge.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think, I mean, I'm not a trader, but I've been on the floor a few times, and I feel like it's so black and white in a sense, where it is so aggressive and is so competitive, because it has to be. And it was interesting. You said there's an element of every manager, and I believe this of every high achiever or every professional athlete. You've got to have like a slight kind of obsession with it to be able to be where you are now. What were the key things you learned then that you took into your role as a manager and your other roles that you've had?
I think you're dead right what you say. I think every athlete has that selfish streak as well. They want to do well. They want to win. And that's why the city, the financial market, I've said to the players many times, they would have loved that environment. It's obviously changed now in terms of what happened after the crash and everything else. But the fact is, they would have loved that environment. And what I learned was the need for teamwork. There was no point me making X amount if a colleague or two colleagues lost 3 times the amount, because net we were down on the day. It was about the teamwork, working together. You know, if we wanted to buy dollars, we bought them together. If someone was struggling, we helped he or her get out of that situation. So the communication, the teamwork, the risk reward, the pressure that you were under every day, the hours that you work, the intensity of the work, all of these things you can take into football. You know, whether you're on the touchline, people always say, what was harder, the markets or football? They were two very, very similar environments, two very similar arenas, Charlie, because you were constantly, you know, you're sitting there at work, it'd be very, very quiet, and then something happened. You know, it was, I don't know, Iraq invasion or something happened. You know, the worst I can remember, obviously, terrible was 9/11. But you're sitting there quietly. I remember very, very clearly you're at AIG, and that type of, you know, long like that event with so many implications, the tragedy of such an event, but how the consequences of the financial markets. We never left the office for 2 days, you know, 2.5 days because of the implications. But you had events, you had nature not so big as that, all the time coming through, figures coming out where you had to be in focus. You had to be concentrated on your job. If you didn't, you paid the price. And I find that very similar to football. If you don't focus and analyze and prepare well, Charlie, you get found out and you lose the game.
I suppose you have to be reactive as well to so much uncertainty. It's interesting you were talking about that, which, you know, 9/11, an awful tragedy. And it made me think of the pandemic in a way, because there's so much uncertainty. And I think that's what people who aren't used to it have found it really difficult to cope. Because I think as an element, we all try and control everything. So we like to have this certain path. How much has that helped you during this time? Has it made you approach things differently?
Yeah, it has. I think I was in the city a long time. Don't forget, I was in there for 23, 24 years.
Mm.
So it was a long stint. And I worked my way up, and I was very fortunate to work at some big banks, RBS, Bank of America, AIG, and Nomura, big trading houses, and had good responsibility. But you did right. You know, you had to react to certain news coming out. I was always intrigued. I said to my staff, we'd have big numbers would come out at 1:30, 8:30 New York time. And it might be, for example, GDP, domestic produce, it might be trade numbers coming out. And you knew the market would be really volatile. It would react so violently to the news coming out, one way or the other. And it could be very, very difficult trading conditions. I looked at my senior traders to the left, and they saw it as a chance to make money. And they couldn't wait for the number to come out. And the other traders to the right saw it as the glass half empty, and we could lose our money here. We could lose our month here. They saw the pessimistic side, and the really good traders saw the optimistic side. And that's like football now. You know, do you look at this run of 5 games in 14 days as, oh my God, look, the 3 away games? Or do you say, here's a chance, we're fitter and stronger than the opposite, here's a chance to go and get points? So it's that outlook, it's that optimistic outlook, seeing opportunity, which I hope I've been able to take from the city and use wisely where possible.
You're talking of run of games, you know, you're in the Championship, which is absolutely relentless. But I also find I'm a Sheffield United supporter, which we're probably not going to be in the Premier League for much longer, that there's this expectation of that you should be in the Premier League, you should be in the playoff, and the Championship is there's so many good sides that are all vying for that, you know, 2 spots. How do you deal with that?
How long have you got for this question? Because this is a great question, Charlie. I look at it, I speak about this regularly, about expectation. So, you know, I look at it, and I've worked when I was at Brentford, I was there for 5 years, and there was no expectation. We came up with Wolves in terms of promotion, but there was no expectation. In fact, we were favourites to go down. So we could go and play our football with 0 fan expectation, just great support behind us. And then you go to Rangers, you know, Glasgow Rangers, and of course their European pedigree, the size of the club, their global reach, and the constant expectation, a really steep learning curve. And then you go to Nottingham Forest, twice European champions, who haven't been in the Premier League for 20 odd years. But you listen to the fan base, and we're a top Premier League club.
Yeah.
And I'm not being sarcastic in any way. I'm not
No, but it's true.
We're a magnificent club. But all I ever heard was Brian Clough. It was 40 years ago, Charlie. And I'm saying we've got to move forward. We've got to change the fan base, etc. But they were stuck in that time. And I think every manager has battled that. And then you go from there, and you're looking, and I'm saying now, well, how many people expect to be in? I hear, like, we had a fans forum last night, and every fan is passionate about their club. But you hear them say, how do we push on now to where we should be at the Premier League? Well, I look at it and go, well, at the bottom right now, we've got Derby, Sheffield Wednesday, Birmingham, Huddersfield. These are big clubs, big clubs. You look at Middlesbrough, all of these clubs have an expectation to be in the Premier League, but no divine right to be there. And you're always dealing as a manager, as a coach, as a CEO, you're dealing with that fan expectation. You know, we need to go and invest to make sure we get in the Premier League. How much do you have to spend to get in the Premier League now? And you look at the budget disparity between a Watford, say, or Norwich and Wickham, for example. Now, Wickham have done exceptionally well with the budget they have. Gareth's done a magnificent job, but their budget will be a fraction of so many people in the same division, but the expectation will still be there. So I just think if you can manage that expectation, and I said to our head of media, the only way I can see of doing it is improving communication to the fans, being honest with them. And I don't think sometimes, Charlie, they like what you have to say, but you've got to be realistic. We have no divine right to be in the Premier League. In terms of the crowd size, where would we fit in the Championship? You know, 14th, 15th, maybe, that type. So why do we have a divine right to be there? Now, of course, we're going to try and push, and every club will say the same, and develop a squad that can go as high as it possibly can. But there's no divine right. As long as you can realise that and remove that unrealistic expectation, then you're in a much better place. But right now, I think too many managers, coaches, players, staff are dealing with that unrealistic expectation.
It's a really interesting point. I don't think it's spoken about enough, where you can be a fan from any of those clubs you mentioned pretty much and have that same thing where you look at your history and say, I mean, gosh, I've even done it myself. You know, when Sheffield United were in the Championship, well, we should be in the Premier League because look at our fan base and things like that. But then if you look at the budget, it doesn't reflect on that. How do you deal with the frustration, not of that, but of the limit around budgets? Because you hear criticism for managers where it's like, why didn't they buy that player? And I've heard it within various different clubs. And then you look at the budget and you're like, well, they couldn't afford it. So it wasn't necessarily the manager's choice, but then it comes on you. Do you find that you have to balance that frustration, or do you get frustrated?
No, you do. You have to balance it. But again, I think it comes down to communication. So you'll hear, why did we go and get Jordan Hugill? You know, it shows a lack of desire, a lack of intent by the board or by the club. How do we respond to that, Charlie? Do we say nothing, in which case such social media platforms will circulate and build on that? Or do we come out and say, we simply haven't got the budget to buy such a player? And then they'll say, but what about our owners? Well, we're limited by FFP, you know, profit and sustainability. We've got to adhere to the rules, especially after QPR's pass, for example. We've got to adhere to the rules. The fans don't want to hear that. They want to hear this really ambitious. Owners are then worried about lack of season ticket sales because fans become, you know, disinterested. So everything's a balancing act. But if you don't give clarity, communication to a fan, so if I'm a Sheffield United board member and I tell you the honest truth, I'm sorry, we just simply can't afford that player. Our budget is probably 14th in the, you know. So Sheffield United now, what did Chris have in terms of Premier League budget? It probably was the bottom budget.
Yeah, it
probably was. You know, he did a magnificent job. You know, I know Chris very well, huge respect. What a job he did the year before. And because it's slightly difficult and they lost Jack O'Connell and other players this year, he's paid the price. But the actual fact is, tell the fans where it is budget-wise, what you're dealing on and battling against, and the reality of the situation. And hopefully, the true fans, Charlie, give you a little bit of slack and a bit more time.
Yeah, I think it's a really good way to look at things. I personally would prefer that communication, I think. Talking of, you mentioned Chris Wilder, talking of the merry-go-round, I suppose, of managers, how do you as a man, is it something that comes into your mind? Do you just accept it as part and parcel of the job, that there is that one in, one out a lot of the time?
Yeah, it is. I just think, what other business acts like this? You know, you look at certain clubs who will go and spend, I don't know, £100 million in the Premier League, for example, in the transfer window. and change their manager 3 months later. And I'm thinking, what other business would invest that much money and make such a significant change so quickly?
Is there
And
any other
I remember,
business? Is it so unique
no,
to football? I can't think of anything.
no, Charlie, I said, I was actually talking to a player yesterday who came in a bit frustrated about something. I was chatting to him and I said that the way football works, I remember going to AIG when they were the biggest American company, bigger than Citibank. This was going back in 2000, 2001, I think it was. And when I first went in, one of the senior partners said, take the first year to settle in. And obviously I was keen to go straight away. You're competitive and you want to trade. But he said, no, just set yourself in, get used to the way we price, understand our customers. You'll go to New York or Hong Kong or Singapore and get to know the guys, but use that first year to settle into the company. And I'm thinking at football, you might have 3 months and you're gone. Here we are in this top financial, top tier Premier League, so to speak, of the financial markets. And they're saying take a year to settle in. And there's a different approach. They give people time. That's one commodity that other businesses do afford their senior staff. And yet football, you can be gone in 3 or 4 or 5 months, which is quite incredible. When you see clubs have had 4 managers in a season, how on earth can that possibly work, Charlie? But we're not surprised, unfortunately.
I don't think it does work. I think that's part of the problem.
Right. You're right. And the clubs that have stuck by their staff, I remember Lee Johnson going through a tough one, Dean Smith of Brentford going through a tough one.
Yeah.
They come through it and they show their quality and do a magnificent job. But you're going to have tough times. You're going to have players out through injury or suspension. You're going to have a dip in form. You're going to have the randomness of the game go against you for a run of games. And you can't pay the price for your job, surely, in that short period.
Personally, does it bother you? Or is it?
Doesn't. No, I think I'm probably a bit unfair to say that. I'm 58 years old. I've been very lucky to do okay in terms of my career. So I'm probably slightly older. I said to someone the other day, if I was 38, finishing a playing career and coming to football, I'd be far more anxious. I don't see enough jobs for good British coaches, for example. They do their pro license and where do they go? And all these things will bother me. But now I think I've maybe got an older, just a dinosaur head on, saying that, all you can do is your best you can do every day. That's all
wise
you can
head.
do. Well, maybe.
A wise head.
I'm sure I know that. But, I think it's more. I think really, I learned in the city that the best boss I ever worked for. I learned so much from him. But he said, all you can do is the best you can do every day. Now they were saying that way before football. Now I see, be the best you can be every day is a football slogan. That was back in the 90s and 80s. They were saying, just be the best you can be. And I remember the best boss. That's what he said. You can have good days and not so good days. Sometimes whatever you touch goes wrong. But as long as you're focused and concentrated over the course of 10 days, you'll get 7 right. And that's all I'm going to ask of you. And that's the same in football. So I've got that sort of approach. Go into work, give it everything you've got. If it's not good enough and they sack you, well, then so be it. But at least you can wake up with no regrets.
How do you cope with those bad days then? Is that something you say to yourself, or what have you learned over, your career? Because I can imagine when you were younger, maybe it was different how you would approach those bad days to now.
Yeah, very different. Very different. I think the trading side of it, I'll try to explain how your mindset could work. So say, for example, your budget to make in a year was $10 million. Say that was your budget to make. So I would look at it and go, right, 2 months, you have holidays, Christmas, etc. So over 10 months, I've got to make $1 million a month. I've got to make 250 a week. I've got to make 50 grand a day. So my mind thinks very much like that. 50 grand a day. So if I make 75 on a Monday, I'm 25 up. I make 75 on a Tuesday, I'm now 50 up. I'm a day in lieu, so to speak. My other good colleague or good friend would look at it completely different. Might do nothing for the first 7 days, put a position on and make $2.5 million over the next week. But his approach was very, very different to mine. So, and if I had a bad run, I'd be so hard on myself. Now, if we have a bad run of form, I look back at what have we done? Did we prepare well? Did we analyze well? Did we coach well? Did we do this, etc.? If I'm happy, then there's nothing more we can do. Go back 20 years, Charlie, I'd be beating myself up and being so frustrated and not so hard to be with. I was a pain in the backside to be with because I couldn't understand, what did I do wrong? And I'm blaming myself. No, sometimes you've got to accept things don't go your way. The news comes out, you're caught with the wrong position, you lose your week's money or your month's money, nothing you can do. Nothing you can do. All you can do is put your head down, start again.
I think it's really common outside of football as well for people to beat themselves up a lot when things don't go right. In fact, I was even messaging somebody today and, they're in their 50s and they were like, oh God, I made this mistake. And they were just really beating themselves up all the time, and not like, I was trying to get them to see that, all that's going to do is make them feel worse, and that it's actually okay to make a mistake. But, football's a great example of that because it's really unforgiving. How do you cope with losses? We spoke to a few different managers actually, and I remember speaking. He was brilliant, Rotherham boss Paul Warne, and he said he really gets upset and struggles to cope with the losing.
Yeah, and everyone's different, Charlie. And the advice you gave your friend this morning is dead right, but it's so hard. The advice is right. Can they take it on board? Is the question. Can they heed the advice? I think for me, the trouble with football is you go to work in front of 20,000 people. So I say about people say, I want to be a football player. Don't ever forget these players go to do their job of work in front of a large audience. Everything they do is on social media and analysed by Sky or BT Sport, whatever it may be, and every mistake, and then they go out in society. If they're out, they're seen having a few drinks, they're clicked, and they live a life which can be either great or can be so difficult and so challenging. And if, for example, you're a player having a tough time, how do they then deal with it? They're having a tough time. They're not scoring as a striker, for example, and they're seen out in the town and all the press that comes with it. So from a manager's point of view, everything we do is analysed. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, I'm the same as Paul Warne. I do get frustrated. Obviously, you drive home from the ground and what did we do wrong? What about this? Did I pick the right team, or was the formation right? But as I say earlier, maybe I'm older than Paul, but I look at it and say, well, right now, as long as I'm comfortable that I've done everything right and chat to the staff, and I'll always go to my staff, for example, John, what do you think on a Monday? What's your team? I'll ask Neil Banfield, what's your team? The goalkeeping coach, go, what's your team? And on a Wednesday, what's your team? See if they've changed it because of training, see if they're seeing what I'm seeing and vice versa. I know what I want. I'm really keen to hear their thoughts and their input, and I'll change my mind if I think they're right, because everyone's then involved in it. But as long as we go through a process, Charlie, and I can look at it and say, you know what, we prepared well for the game. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, we lost 2-1 or we didn't perform. Well, then you have to take it.
There's a few players I've been talking to recently. I won't mention their names because they haven't come out yet, and they spoke about preparation and how at least if they know they've prepared really well, then they can walk away and go, well, I did everything I can. And sometimes we can't control these different circumstances or what somebody else does. I just want to touch upon, you said about social media, and it's something that's come up a lot because it's really changed the environment when you're in public eye, and especially in football. Like you said, they're kind of on the pitch and scrutinized. But I know for yourself that you also had that scrutiny too. And you mentioned about expectation. I could kind of want to take you back for when you were manager at Glasgow Rangers in 2015, which is such a huge job to manage either one of those teams, Rangers or Celtic. Can you describe the level of pressure you were on and what it was like for you when you, a lot of people will know you got a lot of social abuse afterwards, including death threats and texts because your number was leaked. What was that like for you?
Well, firstly, it was a privilege to manage that club, Charlie. That's the truth of it. They are a giant global brand, the two Glasgow clubs. The Old Firm games were magnificent occasions. And it really was, I look back at that and I said to my son, if I can't enjoy those games, I shouldn't be in football, because it really was a privilege. We all love the sport, but they are some of the biggest games in world football. So to be involved in such a capacity was a true privilege. The first year in Glasgow, the chairman made it very clear, promotion was non-negotiable. I don't mind that. That goes back to the city. There's a start target that you have to achieve. We achieved that. We won the League Training Cup and we beat Celtic in the semi-finals, get to the Scottish Cup final as well. So the first year's report was very good. Then, of course, you now have the Old Firm, up there with Celtic. Now, here we go to budgets again. And we had a budget, I think, probably 20% of their rivals at the time. And we had to have it. I knew that. And beating them in the semi-final the year before was a great day out for the Blue supporters, but the worst thing we could do in terms of expectation. So you knew that they had a team packed of internationals. Now the pressure really grew. And it was interesting that I landed in Glasgow my first week there, and a really wise reporter said, there's always a good cop and a bad cop in Glasgow. I didn't know what he meant. He said, right now, Ronnie Dyler is a bad cop. You're the good cop. Now, Ronnie they were ahead of the top of the SPFL, Charlie, by 6-7 points, whatever it may be. And he was getting dogs abuse every day in the back pages. Now, we might win 1-0 away in a really scrappy game, and they say, Rangers romp to victory again. You know, Celtic might win 2-0. Celtic only scored 2. They should have scored 7. This type of thing. Whatever he did was wrong. But then when Brendan arrived, I remember what he said. He phoned me out and said, remember what I told you?
Oh, no.
And we drew the opening game with Hamilton. And suddenly, bang, the tone changed completely. And you learn. It was a fantastic learning curve for me. But dealing with that pressure and that spotlight then that second year, then we had Joey Barton's situation, and then you had the expectation of the fans who thought we should be winning the league. Celtic had their best ever year in their history to go unbeaten. So the gap, we were second, and the gap was there of 20 odd points. Now the fact was the non-negotiable for year 3 was to get into Europe, which I thought was fair. If you can't get into Europe with Rangers in year 3, this was year 2, and we were second when we were sacked. But then you have to deal with that. Well, actually, it came out that we resigned. We never did. That's common knowledge now. We had no idea what was going on. So, of course, your number gets leaked, and I saw that. And then the abuse started. I literally drove home from Scotland, Charlie. The truth is, I couldn't phone my wife, who went mad when I got here. I pulled in the driveway because my phone was constantly beep, 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 beep with texts coming in, either from Rangers fans who thought I'd walked out in the club, which you would never, ever do, or from Celtic fans who gleefully had my number and given all sorts of abuse down the phone. So as an older man, as you said, wise very kindly, as an older man, you can deal with that. I'm always more worried about the younger players, how they deal with it. I've got a son who's 26, 27, and I'm thinking, if that was my son, how would he deal with that level of abuse?
Yeah.
You know, and it's so hard. And I know we've had a goalkeeper, Joe Lumley, who's a top lad, deal with it. I've seen many players, Brightside Samuel, racist abuse, how these guys have to deal with the level of abuse and what makes a person think they have the right, Charlie, to go on a platform and give abuse to a fellow human being. It's beyond me. It really is beyond me. And I think we've got to do so much more. I'm drifting off subject here, but we've got to do
it's
so much
important.
more because it's not right. These guys are dealing with a really high stress, pressurized. Imagine I was doing a dealing in the dealing world, and at the same time, every time I lost money, I'm getting abused on a social media platform.
Yeah.
How would I have coped with that? And yet these guys now, many of whom have just turned 20, for example, again, awful abuse, and it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. Now you might turn around and say, well, I'll tell you what, don't go on the platform. But they're young, they're younger, and they live on the phone. This is their world. It's not my world, but they live in that world. They shouldn't accept abuse. Opinion, yes. Mark, you had a shocking game today. No problem with that. Don't give me a volley of abuse on a platform because I can't respond. And B, I know these guys hide behind a keyboard and they just type away. I also know, Charlie, it's probably a very, very small minority of people, maybe 1%, 2% of people, the fans that would do this. But still, it can have a devastating impact on too many competitive sportsmen who have enough to deal with right now.
And I think sometimes we look, it's awful, but there's this like transactional commodity thing, and actually forgetting that they're human beings and some people that have mental health, and then money gets thrown in, and it's like, no, money isn't about mental health. Money doesn't counter any mental health or any abuse. You said, well, I'm old enough, and it can't be nice for you, but imagine what it was like if it was your son. But I can still imagine that it must have been really hard for you. You're still a human being that has emotions, and also your wife having to see you do that. Did it make you think at any point, sod this, like, I'm putting myself out there and I'm getting this?
I've got to be honest, I couldn't control it. That was the anger. I wanted to come out as a legal situation. I wanted to come out and say, do you honestly think I'd resign for a club like Rangers? This magnificent football institution. And it's a privilege. I've always said, I've never changed my story. It's a privilege to manage there and to have some great friends there. And I lived there for 2 years, with 2 fantastic years. Do you honestly think I would walk away from this club? But I couldn't answer the questions. Of course, the more days that pass of you not answering, the greater the abuse. And the media up in Glasgow they seem to, there's some good guys, Charlie, but there's some guys that seem to have a divine right to lead with speculation and complete fabrication, which would never be tolerated down here. You could never get away with it in English papers. Yet for some reason up there, they get away with it. And it really is a goldfish bowl for a number of reasons. One, because of the nature of Glasgow Rangers and Glasgow Celtic, but because of the media speculation, the people, the city itself, it's a unique football theatre. And as I say, it has so many good things, but I must say, the occasions you're pointing out, highlighting the abuse side of it, that was tough. I was angry. I couldn't respond. I was angry for a long time. And Brendan actually said to me, take a year off. and I probably should have taken 6 months off. But when Nottingham Forest come calling 2 weeks later, what do? Do you turn down a club of that stature? Because jobs are few and far between.
Yeah.
It was really hard. And my wife said to me, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I'm like, "Well, I want to work. I'm too young not to work. But how do you turn down Nottingham Forest?" In hindsight, maybe my CV was strong enough. I should have taken 2 or 3 months just to calm down and clear my head.
But it's hard to do that. I mean, I find that hard because you're like, oh, but you just don't know. You need to take these things, and like you said, Nottingham Forest is a big club. I just want to ask you about well, actually, I'll stay on Nottingham Forest. Then I want to ask you something about social media, because you mentioned Nottingham Forest. You left Nottingham Forest and in 2017, and then you were out of work for a period. How hard is that to deal with? Somebody that just springs to mind is, I know Nigel Atkins. He's a lovely man, and he's been out of work for, I think, around maybe a year and a half, 2 years, and now he's obviously back in work. How do you deal with those periods?
Really tough. I've got to say, I left school, played football at 16 to 18, went straight in the city and worked all the way through. Then I did my badges, went straight into coaching, and the rest you know. I'd never not worked, ever. I think I took a year to go around Europe on my own money to learn about, the various academies and the clubs around. You're very fortunate to do that. But I'd never not worked, Charlie. And then this happened, and again, that feeling of anger and frustration. So you go on Google, it reads Nottingham Forest sacked Mark Warburton. And then you go, well, hang on, where does it say my KPIs were this? I've hit every single KPI. We're 12th in the table, reduced the size of the squad, went from 36 to 22, reduced the average age, 29 to 22. We've hit every KPI, be steady in the league and look to build on, after last year, just avoiding relegation. We're 12th. And then you get sacked on New Year's Eve. And you think, what other profession? But then you're angry again. That same sentiment I felt after Glasgow, because you can't get your point across. It sounds bitter and twisted. It wasn't. You say, hang on a second. Now, we stayed up and Blackburn went down. I get sacked and Tony Mowbray gets a new contract. I mean, Tony's a fantastic man, don't get it wrong. Nothing derogatory of Tony there, but that's a stark reality. Then you face, well, why was he sacked by them? And what happened at Rangers? And you don't get looked at for a job. Now, I'm lucky money-wise. I'm okay, touch wood, and I've worked hard, so I wasn't worried financially about paying the mortgage or anything like that. I was worried about, I like to work. The LMA are magnificent. I've got to say, League Managers Association, the work done by Richard Bevan and the staff is incredible. Really is. How they support the managers and coaches is second to none. So they were very, very helpful, and they give you jobs and webinars to do and presentations to make, etc. But you still feel, hang on a second, I'm out of work here. I'm not sure why. And it's that horrible sentence for me personally, Charlie. I didn't deal with that well, because I'm thinking I want to explain myself. How do people look at me and think of me? Well, he's failed there. Hang on, no. I've hit all my KPIs. In my old world in the city, hit your KPIs, you're in a good place. In football, hit your KPIs, and it's 50-50 to keep your job. So I didn't. Hands up, I didn't deal with that very well. And as I say, I had to wait and be patient, turn down one or two which were not right, because I knew then that if I chose badly after that, I'd have no chance. There'd be dire consequences. So I had to make sure I chose wisely. And then QPR came along, I met with Les, and he's back working in London after being away in Glasgow, Nottingham, and it suited. So for me, I was very fortunate. But to get a job now, Charlie, irrespective of your CV or your name or your pedigree, whatever word you want to use, you're very fortunate to get a job now. There's very few jobs available, and look how many good people are not working right now.
I think also on a wider context, people will relate to it because of the pandemic. And one thing I loved about what you said, and I think you said, "Oh, you're angry," and it's like, well, anger's a normal human emotion. Like, I'd be angry, like I think anybody would in that situation. But the one thing I loved that you touched upon is actually, like, working is so important for your self-worth and for your mental health and for feeling valued. And I think when something like that happens, it can really knock your confidence. I don't know how much, what did you do to help yourself during that time and to help build your confidence back up to be able to then go and do what you're doing at QPR?
I think a number of things. I've always traveled, so when I left the city, I will come back to your question, but I left the city and I knew I didn't have a deep enough education. So I went round and I phoned, I literally cold called a number of clubs and got pied by all of these various clubs. Who are you? Go away type thing. And then finally, a guy at Sporting Lisbon, who's a dear friend called Diogo Matos now, works with FIFA, but he was the academy director. He said, if you can get on a plane, I'll come play golf tomorrow and have 5 hours with me. That 5 hours became a week of watching Sporting Lisbon. And bearing in mind, they produced Figo, Ronaldo, Quaresma, Nani, these type of players. And I spent many weeks at Sporting Lisbon. He's still a dear friend. And he introduced me to Ajax, and they introduced me to PSV, and in turn Barcelona. So I'm going all around these magnificent clubs, learning about youth development, which later down became the Next Gen series. That I could go in all of these clubs, and we did that tournament. But that side of it was very important. So jump forward to losing your job. I went and spent a couple of weeks in Seattle Sounders with a good friend, Damon Roden. I went to New England Revolution with Brad Friedel. I was intrigued by the MLS. I was intrigued by how they had written their own rules in terms of players and the transfer market and equal budgets. And so absolutely, I was very close to getting 2 jobs over there. Very, very close. I didn't get them because I didn't speak Spanish, and the large contingent of South Americans. So there's something to learn about making sure you do a language at school. But I was fascinated by that side of it. So I traveled quite extensively and spoke to a lot of football people. LMA asked me to do a report. So that had me speaking to all the Football League managers and visiting various clubs. And I had good friends, Tottenham just down the road, and Arsenal, good people who are very loyal friends, Charlie. And you find out who your friends are, by the way, in this situation. I'm sure every manager or coach will tell you the same. You do find out who your friends are. So I'll always phone up, you spoke about Chris Wilder, your club, Sheffield United. What a fantastic job. You just drop a text just to let them know that you're aware of the situation and you know what you think. And that type of thing, you find out your friends very, very quickly. But I kept myself busy. But I've got to say, after a year, people say, oh, it's fantastic. You can go and play golf, you can go walking. And I've got to say, Charlie, you sit there, and I'm an early bird. I've always been early. And you sit there in the morning and you're going, so it's 8 o'clock and I've had my coffee and the dog's been for like 4 walks already.
Yeah, now what?
What do I do now? Yeah, my dog's looking at me saying, no more, please, But it's like, what do you do? And I have to, me personally, I have to have something to focus on. So that I didn't deal with. I could see myself not dealing with that very well. So I sympathize and empathize and fully understand the mental side of many people suffering in that situation.
Would you advise then to kind of throw yourself into something to give yourself a focus, to have routine? And it sounds like, you took that, but then you went and learnt more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone's different, how you deal with it. I appreciate that, but there has to be some generic traits. And I think you have to keep yourself occupied. You have to feel you have a worth when you're up in the morning. I like to know that when you go to bed, the day's been worthwhile. You've done something. And for me, you produce something. And that's really, really important. So going to Seattle, you go there, there's that feeling of, I want to get involved. I want to do something, but also you're learning. You might be learning how not to do it. You might be learning that I'd never do that. But you're seeing how other clubs do certain things, and you're always picking up something. You'll meet one good contact. I was in Seattle, for example, and you may not remember him, Alan Hinton, the old Derby player, used to wear the white boot. When I was a kid growing up, Alan Hinton, George Best wore the white boots, or Alan Ball wore the white boots. This guy comes up to me in a bar in Seattle and says, I'm Alan Hinton. Wow. And he's been there for X number of years with his wife, had a fantastic dinner, great chatting to him about different things. But you meet people, really interesting people, and that allowed you to get your story across. He phoned someone for me in the MLS. They contacted me. An interview followed purely by meeting him in the bar. So, it really is a village football, Charlie. But I just found you've got to have a purpose to your day. I think, for me personally, and to sit there and twiddle your thumbs, I think I fully understand. I'm very lucky. I'm very, very fortunate. I've paid the mortgages. I'm not saying an arrogant way. I'm saying I'm older and I've paid the mortgage and I've got no bills like that. People who have debts to pay and are not working, are twiddling their thumbs, I can only imagine the pain and the suffering they can be going through.
Yeah, and I think that it's, you said about, well, that's what is right for me. And I think there is a commonality. Like, I'm somebody that also needs to work, needs to be busy. I'm not very good at twiddling my thumbs. The thing I wanted to pick up on you before I forget, I've just scribbled it down, is we were talking about socials, and then I kind of wanted to talk about Nottingham Forest with you, and then we kind of went that way. What would your advice be then in terms of social media to your players? Just picking up back on that, because I wanted to make sure I asked you.
I think just be honest with them, the same as communicating with the fans, as we discussed earlier. You can have a good performance, score 2 goals, win a game of football 2-0, and you get some lovely, lovely comments. The same people will batter you a week later. So I'm just saying to players, if you expose yourself to that social media platform, and that may be the world that you currently live in, please understand the implications. As I say, you get some very good people on there, don't get me wrong, but there is a small minority who can absolutely destroy an individual. And as I say, I'm older with thicker skin, but I think very long and hard about the young players and the consequences of them reading some of the drivel and bile that they receive. So for me, if you are going to go on it, please understand that there will be consequences to it. And I think if you can be honest with the players and the staff, then it's their decision, they're men after that.
Yeah. I think one of the things I heard, which was great as well, is like, if you're going to take the praise, then you've got to almost understand that there will be the backlash. So the praise isn't necessarily real, if that makes sense, because it's praise from somebody that you don't know, and also abuse that somebody you don't know. So if you kind of just level it, then you won't kind of take, oh my gosh, somebody's praising, oh my God, somebody slagged me off, and know that it's actually your own surroundings and the people that know you. And I want to talk to you about management as well, obviously, in terms of how you manage players, because I've discussed this with a few different managers and a few different people, and I'm trying to think how to put it in a conversation where they were talking, this was from some players and a manager, they were talking about how some managers really lack empathy, and then they don't get the best out of the players, and they kind of manage from like a really high level. What do you think is the best way, and what do you do in terms of your players? Is there that understanding and that lack of empathy for who they are as individuals, and how important is it to address the psychology and mental health side of things?
I think it's vitally important. I think paramount importance, China, and honestly, I think I can only learn from my education, so to speak, in the city, and how my boss would treat us in that pressurized environment. We were human beings, absolutely human beings. He knew that if you were struggling, and for me personally, I can deal with all the pressure at work, but if I have a domestic situation, I find it very, very hard. So my boss would recognize if there's a problem or something. And I've always tried to take that in. There's a generic approach in terms of discipline for the squad, timekeeping, rules, etc. Respect how we speak to each other. Very, very important, but generic. And then there's the individual approach where everyone's needs are different. And the guy that's got 3 kids or a young baby or hasn't slept well or this type of thing, the 36-year-old compared to the 21-year-old, and how his loading might need to be different. He might need that day off, but don't just give him a day off. Explain to him why you're doing it and engage to make him feel really good, and then chat to the other guys about why you're doing it. So there's none like, why has he got a day off? They remove all doubts, and just they know that you've got their back. And I've always taken that into how I manage people. I speak to them as I would my son. Try and treat them fairly. Honestly, I would do. But I'm very, very big on respect. I'm massive on respect. So if, for example, the training session is bad in the morning, I've got no problem. You knock on my door, Charlie, and going, Gaff, I didn't understand that session at all. And I probably would have put my hand up already and gone, that didn't work. If you bang on my door and go, that session was, then there's a problem. Yeah. So I think the respect, how we speak to each other. I wouldn't have a player be rude to a staff member, but likewise, I wouldn't have a staff member talk down in the hole to a player. I'm not sounding like a holier than thou. We're in a competitive men's, football environment, but we've got to have that level of respect. Absolutely. And if we break that line, so I think the whole environment falls apart. So for me, vitally important, but you have to understand everyone's individual needs and requirements.
And how much do you think mindset plays into football? Again, I spoke to various different people. Eric Dyer was saying about Jose Mourinho being like one of the strongest mentally that he's worked with, and how psychology plays into your game.
I'm always aware. How can I put it? If you're with a kids team, take this the right way. If you're an under 15 team and you give the old, as a youth coach, and you're playing it before a cup final or a tournament, you can give the rah 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 message, and they all love it and they're fine. But as they mature, they've been through that. Most of the players have been through that academy system, so therefore you can't just give it the rah. They want more than that. You've got to give them some substance and what it means. And so for me, I think long and hard before speaking to players. It's not an off-the-cuff one, really. Sometimes it can be, of course, but in general, you've got to think about what message you're trying to convey here. And these are men. They're sporting athletes, but they're men, and they're not kids, and they need to understand your message. You have to be consistent. You have to show integrity, understanding all the things you just spoke about. So I think for me, that mindset is so important. What we're trying to achieve. So for us now at QPR. I've heard some people say, oh yeah, but very often players mid-table, they're on the beach already. What a shocking statement. That's like saying you're in a bank and you made your budget by September, therefore don't trade the rest of the year. Absolute nonsense, Charlie. So for me, it's that mindset of what can we achieve? How strong can we be? Where do we finish? How's that tears up for next season? How do we evolve as a squad of players? All the time I'm thinking about this. So the mindset is huge for me, but you've got to be consistent and appreciate their men. So it can't be this childlike message. It has to have meaning and substance. And I hope very much they can take that on board.
There's so much that you've talked to us about. It's been absolutely brilliant. One thing I do want to ask you is there anything that you would say to anyone that's finding things difficult at the moment or that's struggling? And I think specifically for, I think it's so great that we've got you on, because I really want to make sure that, you've been so open, and that we send the message that men can be open, and an older man can be open. We can have these conversations, and we can have honest conversations, and we can feel these things, and you can feel crap, and you can make mistakes. And is there anything that you would, I don't know, in terms of advice, give to anyone that's finding things tough right now and struggling, that's helped you through in your past that we haven't covered?
Yeah, I think very much so. It's going to sound very obvious, and I apologize for that, but it's very, very important to me is you've got to speak to someone. I don't mean you pick up a specialist or a psychologist if it's there for you. Of course you do that. But for me personally, it was just having good people you can speak to. And that was, when you're struggling and you're having a tough day, you need to speak to someone. And don't be, you adopt this male suit of armor and I'm fine and everything else. I'm quite mentally strong, I think. I've never had to speak to any, to a specialist or anything. I'm very fortunate in that respect. I've been through a very intense pressurized industry for a long, long time now. So I feel I've got a coat of armor that I can wear. But there are times that the period you reflected on or touched on, Charlie, the out of work period, I found it really hard. And you need to speak to people then. And you need to tell them why you're finding it hard. Don't just say, yeah, I'm fine there, no worries, I'm all good. Because it's not enough. You put the phone down and you feel even worse because you've had an opportunity that you've bypassed to really speak to someone. So all I would say is you find out who your friends are in football and high pressure environments. So use your friends. And it may be two people, maybe one person, Charlie. It may be 10, I don't care. But there's someone there you can just chat to and just get some off your chest. I found that really useful, and I've got really good friends and people I've worked with, people like Davey Weir and Frank McParland, the top people, and a lot of other good people as well. Friends in Scotland who became close associates. So you can phone them up and you can talk about it, and you have to, because if you don't, you do get to a point, touch wood, I've never been there, but I'm sure you get to a point, Charlie, where the adverse effects are so great, it's going to have serious consequences.
Yeah. And I think it's such an important message. It's not simple at all, because it's actually really hard. And you made me smile with the I'm fine, because I think as I've got older, it's something I've learned, because, you said the male suit of armor, which I think is definitely there. And I think I'm Northern, and I think that can sometimes be the thing as well, as in like wear the suit of armor. I'm fine. And I definitely did that as a habit from a young age, and it's something I've learned. And when you said, if you put the phone down and you've said I'm fine when you're not, it almost makes you feel even more like isolated, but also as in, well, I could have been soothed there, and it prevents you from being soothed.
Yeah, it does. I think you've got to look at your own personality, your own character traits. So I, for one, Charlie, will never discuss my business in public. So how can I put it down? If I have a row with my wife, for example, I don't go to work and go, oh, shock a row. I've got colleagues who come in and go, oh, give me every detail of the row with their wife or their daughter or their son. I'm not that, mate. I'll always sound fine. If I've not been well, or the problem with a health issue, no, I'm fine, thank you. I keep my business very much myself. I've always been that way. But people say to me, typical you, never say anything. But I don't mind that side of it. But when it gets to the point of, as it got to in that period where you are frustrated and you're angry and you're saying this is not right and you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs, I think at that point you have to have a reliable confidant that you can chat to. I just needed someone, and I did. I had a really good friends who I just got off, and I might have an hour on the phone and get off and go, oh, that's better.
Oh yeah. It's almost like a release, right?
And then I'd phone back and go, sorry about that, I probably moaned for the last hour, and I'd laugh, but at least I was able to do that. I knew I was better for that conversation, and there's some good people out there, Charlie, good friends who can really help you.
Yeah, there really is. Thank you so much, Mark. It's been brilliant speaking to you. I've absolutely loved it, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the season.
Very nice. Great speaking to you, Charlie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks all for listening. There are loads more episodes on our Apple and Spotify page, including the likes of Justin Langer, Chris Robshaw, Elise Christie, and loads more. And remember to visit sportinglife.com, the home of expert analysis and insight for racing, football, golf, and much more. And if you are struggling, like Mark said, please do reach out and speak to a friend. But if you feel like you can't speak to anyone, you can call charities such as Mind, the Samaritans, and Sport in Mind. They are there to help and they do understand. Take care. Thanks again, Mark, and we'll speak again soon.
Charlie, all the best.